So today I wanted to do something different to encourage you, and I want to talk about hope and what hope is, and use Romans 8 to help us understand where our growth and development are going to come from. Let me read first of all from Romans 8, and I'm going to start at verse 24. And he's talking here, it's entitled, this part of the chapter is entitled Future Glory. So he's talking about the future, and he's talking about our development and growth and what we hope for. So verse 24, he says, "For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all. Who hopes for what he already has? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently." So what is that a precursor to? What am I interested in here? Well, I want to offer a principle, really, a practice point that says all your development, all of your personal growth from now till the day you die is actually going to come from what you don't have, not from what you already have, right? In other words, it's going to come from your unbelief, not your belief. And this is quite a challenging idea because, yes, it's in keeping with our practice principles in this course, which is that we're looking at the more difficult parts of us. We're looking at the more difficult side of us, and we're not fighting with it. We're actually working with it, which, that's a difficult idea for us as Christians for a start, because there's so much talk, particularly in modern Bibles, about fighting, this evil thing, and without realizing that actually that's just a metaphor. I'm encouraging you to work with those parts, and furthermore, I think the Bible here is saying that all your growth and development from now on till the day you die actually will come from those difficult parts. You see, what he's saying is, who hopes for what he already has, right? In other words, what you've got, your belief, what you've got is already helping you, and it's already helped you, and it's already, shall we say, you've already got the benefit from that, right? And the danger is, if you were to spend your time, as some do, thinking all the time about what they've got, about their belief, about what separates them and so on, then effectively you become like the Pharisees, because that's what they did. They were forever looking at what they had. Is it Luke 18:10? 2 men went up to pray, Jesus said, and the Pharisee stood at the front of the church saying, "Oh, thank you, Lord, that you've not made me like these others." He's looking at what he already has. He's looking at what he's already got. And what Paul is saying here in Romans 8 is that it's what you haven't yet got is the good bit, right? There's a very good illustration of this because, again, you shouldn't believe me in these aspects. It should come from the Word, right? If we turn to Mark, actually, in Mark 9:24, this is this amazing encounter that someone has with Jesus where he's asking him to heal his son. And Jesus asks a few questions, and the man eventually says, "But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." And Jesus replies, "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for him who believes." It's quite an amazing thing. Imagine saying that to Jesus, if you can. If you can do anything, please help, But then verse 24 is the important bit. It says, "Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, 'I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief.'" And I think this is really interesting for us because clearly the man is saying that this is where I need the help. This is where my progress is going to be. This is where my development is going to be. And I should make an important point here. maybe some of you are struggling with my interest in unbelief here, A lot of what I say is, quite challenging at times. But let me make a distinction here. That I think there's a really good distinction to be made between the unbelief of a believer and the unbelief of a non-believer. You see, the unbelief of a non-believer is useless. It's not helping them at all. All it's doing is justifying their position. It's justifying their error. So the unbelief of a non-believer is useless. But we're talking here about a much more precious thing, actually. We're talking about the unbelief of a believer. Now, in Mark 9:24, the guy makes it very clear, I do believe, he says. So, we've got that. I do believe, help thou my unbelief, it says in more traditional versions, right? So what we're saying here, and I want to come, straight out with it, the unbelief of a believer is not just some embarrassing thing that you've got, right? Because I know some of you are ashamed of it. Some of you are embarrassed by it because we're supposed to have this wonderful faith and everything else. But you've got unbelief and I've got unbelief, and I'll explain why shortly. It shouldn't be an embarrassing thing. It shouldn't be a shameful thing. It should be a valuable thing. We should value our unbelief. Why? Because that's where our progress is going to be, and that's where we need to be working. So let me make that distinction really clear. It's the unbelief of a believer that we're talking about. So why should we be so interested in it, and why is it going to help us so much? Well, remember, and let's bring it now into the neuroscience and into the parts and say, whenever you are triggered, you are in unbelief. Let me just make that clear. When you're in a triggered state, when your brain is perceiving the threat and is reacting and intervening for you because it believes your life to be threatened, you are in unbelief at that moment. Right? So let's keep this really simple. So the front room, your consciousness, your mind, puts God first. That can imagine the higher things, and it can, deep cries out to deep and all of that. But the back room puts you first. And that's the opposition. That's the evil nature. They're simply in opposition to one another. Your mind is putting God first, your flesh is putting you first. So anytime your brain intervenes, then it's intervening from a position of the flesh. And that means it's automatically in unbelief. So, if you want to put it in biblical terms, when you're in a triggered state, you say, I'm in unbelief. Or you could also say, I'm in the flesh. They're just ways of understanding it, right? Because your intervention is automatically in unbelief, because it's putting you first, you see. And there's many examples of this in Scripture where we read about the disciples and the fleshly and worldly reactions to things that Jesus is continually teaching them on and correcting them on. These are in unbelief because they're not trusting God. What does Jesus say to Peter? He says, you don't have in mind the things of God, but the things of man. Right? So Peter's attitude is continually in unbelief. So we now have this idea that when, of connecting these ideas and seeing how the neuroscience is showing that the biblical ideas are true, and showing and proving that this is the human condition. So now we have our language. We can talk about it in neuroscience as a triggered state. We can talk about it in the Bible as being in the flesh. And Paul writes about it here as being our hope, because we're not hoping for what we've already got. We already got that. We're hoping for what we haven't yet achieved, right? And that is to get our parts to trust us, or to put it in a discipling sense, to get our disciples to trust us in the fact that we are able to manage these things, right? And when we manage them correctly, we are in the Spirit, not in the flesh. So, for instance, when he says, and I'll read, and I'm back in Romans 8 at verse 5, we read from verse 5 onwards, those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what nature desires. But those who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. And that's just a biblical way of explaining what I've just said. So when you're triggered, you have your mind set on what nature desires. And what does nature desire? Your survival. That is all your brain is interested in, is your security and your survival. So when the brain steps forward in that triggered state, you can say that at that point your mind is set on what nature desires. But when you're in your core state, what we call your Christ consciousness, then your mind is set on what God desires. And those two things are in eternal opposition to each other. So, if this little piece is helping you in any way, I want it to help you this way. I want it to encourage you to work with those difficult parts of you. I want it to encourage you to hope for what you don't have yet. I want you to be happy and willing to work with your unbelief, because that is where all your progress is going to come from. Right? God knows you have it. You know you have it. I know I have it. Right? But we have it in different measure. Okay? This Roman soldier in Luke 9, he definitely had it. And I think it's such an amazing part of the Bible that he says, I do believe that I've got that already, right? But I need help with my unbelief. He actually talks about himself as an overcomer in the NIV. He says, help me overcome my unbelief. Now, we could say that that is a perfect way of describing our work here in this approach. We're overcoming our unbelief. Put another way, we're getting our parts to trust us. In that way, we're going to walk into situations and deal with situations where we used to be triggered, and we're going to stay in our core self, and we're going to see how easily and comfortably our core self manages those situations. So there we are. I hope that helped you and helped you to study the Word and see that this stuff comes from the Word. And until next time, bye for now.